Okay. Hello, and welcome to the first edition of the Rugby Codebreakers of 2023. Happy New Year, everyone. I don't think I can really get away with saying that anymore. It is the 30th of January, but, we haven't said it before, so Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I don't think we can get away with saying, what did you do over Christmas?
No, I think that's definitely gone. I think the shops are already gearing up for Christmas 23, aren't they? So
The Easter eggs are out since Boxing Day, so
yeah, exactly. So we'll move swiftly on from that because we have got so much to cover from the world of rugby. It's like they've just been setting us homework or something. Not a day goes by, it seems, without another huge story breaking. It's, I mean, I was expecting when we last spoke that we'd come in and do this January episode and all we would talk about would be the Six Nations, which after all is only a couple of weeks away now, and maybe the beginning of the Super League season, the World Club Challenge. But the various rugby unions have given us so much to talk about. I'm not sure we'll even get to those points.
Yeah, and various player indiscretions as well have come up on my side of the code, which are probably need to be addressed, but have not been things that cover the sport in glory.
Indeed. Yeah. So I think that probably the biggest story in English rugby this last week has been the whole RFU plans to remove tackling from above the waist from the community game, which is basically everything below the championship. That has caused a huge outcry. I mean, let's say, first of all, whether you agree with the decision or not, I think everybody in the game agrees that we need to do as much as possible to limit brain injuries,
and
degenerative conditions.
Lawsuit.
Yeah,
there's
and of course
from the amateur players that they brought it against the RFU, probably sparking the knee-jerk reaction.
Definitely, I think. We've spoken about that before. Steve Thompson, probably the most famous of those players, but as I said, over 50 players. It is a case that could be absolutely seismic for the game.
There's also the case being brought by amateur players against the RFU as well as the professional players.
Yes, that's true. And of course, we have a very similar case also brewing against the Rugby Football League as well. So this is an issue that governing bodies are going to have to take account of and deal with. What we've not seen, I think, from the RFU was a great deal of vision and foresight in launching this. I think the biggest problem is that they made this decision without consulting the community clubs first. And without even consulting the Premiership club. So it literally just hand down an edict from on high. And there's other questions. Will it actually help? They seem they're very confident that there is a strong evidence base that this will help reduce head injuries considerably, and they may be right. But I've seen quite a lot of people in the game disputing that.
So the figure you quoted earlier was 80% of head injuries caused by people getting their head on the wrong side of a tackle?
Exactly. I think this rule change is all about protecting the ball carrier from head-high shots, which is understandable because nobody likes to see them. But yeah, I saw one figure quoted of 80% of the head injuries occur to the tackling player. As you say, getting their head in the wrong position. And if you've got multiple people tackling at once, if they're all going low, then that potentially raises the possibility of more collisions, of head clashes. Plus, of course, when you're being tackled, you want to find your front. You want to land, you want to go down on the floor to get the ball recycled between your legs as quickly as possible. So if you've got a player going down into the tackle as another player launches themselves at the legs, yeah, it could get very messy.
On an entirely anecdotal level, I had to stop playing rugby after I collided with another player coming the other way when we were both going for a leg tackle. We bounced off each other. I did my back, and the guy said, "Nice try," as he ran on to score.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where everybody will say it is a brutal game, and it's never going to be 100% safe if you want it to be a contact sport. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that you can't take action to try and minimise the risks as much as possible. But I think it was interesting. Johnny Sexton came out quite strongly against the proposed rule change.
Backed up by Andy Farrell.
Yeah, indeed. And Johnny Sexton is a guy who's copped more than a few head-high shots in his career.
Yeah.
I'd say he's probably noted as somebody who's been on the wrong end of more than average. On the other hand, Owen Farrell was quite supportive of the rule change, despite the fact that it basically outlawed his entire tackling style.
Yeah, he never uses his arms in the first place. So
yeah,
if he's going to have to learn it all over again, he might as well start doing it really properly.
Yeah. I think I've seen now that the RFU have backpedaled a little bit, and they've said there is going to be a consultation with the clubs. I just feel the time for the consultation with the clubs is before you decide on the rule change, not after. And it does seem that whatever happens, whether there is a U-turn or not, that if there is a U-turn, that'll be for 2024. For June 2023, this is going ahead. There
will be so many penalties in games.
Yeah, so many penalties. And it's tough enough for referees at community level sometimes, especially when you've got youth players and their families there, and everyone already giving the referee the round of the kitchen, and if the referee's then got to, send someone off because they've tackled above the waist for the third time in a row or something, and yet those tackles are not what we would consider dangerous, I can understand that the referees could be in for a very long afternoon.
Yeah, it needs to be paused whilst they do their consultation. They can't go ahead during the consultation, surely.
I think so. I mean, one of my mates was saying to me, surely it would have been more sensible, rather than doing this in the whole community game, to find a league or a competition somewhere that was willing to trial it. And then you've got results that you can compare against competitions which are not using this rule change to benchmark it and see what the effect is.
They're even doing this. They're even trialing their new shot clock idea in the Premiership first. So why they couldn't pick a league and go with that and say okay, Division 1, let's go with tackling above below the legs, below the waist only.
Yeah. And I suspect also that there hasn't been. I wonder if there has been clear thought as to how this will affect the game in the way it's played. We already have players. Sonny Bill Williams is probably one of the most famous, who specialise in offloading the ball out of the tackle.
Mm-hmm.
If a guy like that cannot be tackled above the waist, so you can't get a tackler coming in to lock the ball up, what's the point of even tackling him? Because he's always, as long as he's got a support player, he's always going to get the ball away if you can only tackle him below the waist.
And
there are
how
some
would you fancy tackling
teams.
Yeah, how would you fancy tackling someone like Tuigamalo from below the waist only?
Yeah, I feel like if you're playing against Samoa or something, there's every chance that it'd just be a non-stop passage of offloads. People look at we get to like phase 10, phase 15 of rugby. Like, never mind that, you could be on phase 47 if you're counting each offload out of the tackle.
Offloads,
that may
tackles.
not be a bad thing. That might be very entertaining to watch, and we might all say, you know what, that was a great idea. But it seems to me it could be such a dramatic shift in the way the game is played. I'm not sure if that's been thought through.
You can't. It's going to affect mauling as well, surely.
Yeah, must do. And to be honest, a properly executed maul is a thing of wonder. I always loved seeing a team that really knows how to get the maul going, working their way up the pitch with it. That's something that seems to have been largely removed from rugby over the years. You don't get the mauls, the rolling mauls you used to get in the 90s, where teams would go 30, 40 meters.
Yeah, start at the halfway, end at the try line.
Yeah, because apparently it's not entertaining. But I never thought it was.
It's not good telly. It's not flashy.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things. It's very entertaining when it's your team doing it. When you're on the wrong end of it, you start saying, "Oh, pass the ball, run with it."
But when it's tipping down with rain in the West Country, the rolling maul is your best way of getting to the try line.
Yeah,
and keeping some of the players dry.
Indeed, and it's a real skill, and it's, to me, that when we talk about comparisons between rugby league and rugby union and what makes each game different and better in some ways than the others, one of the great things that rugby union always had going for it, I think, was the variety of gameplay. So you could do that. You could lock it up in your forwards. You can dominate the scrum. There's positions where you can choose, aren't there?
Yeah.
You can say, do you want to take a scrum or do you want to kick a penalty? And teams will make a choice based on what their skill set is.
Yeah.
And we see that
if they need to do something like burn up the clock.
Yeah. And we see that variety in the players themselves as well. The difference between player positions is much greater than it is in rugby league. The advantage you get from rugby league, of course, is that the ball is passed through the hands a lot more, and try scoring dominates the way you play the game.
Reflected in the points allocation.
Yeah, but it's an interesting. I think sometimes with rule changes in rugby union, the idea has been, people keep saying, "Oh, let's make the game more open." And I think, we'd love to see open rugby, but
again, we can come back to this shot clock idea, where they're trying to speed up the game, keep it flowing, make it more open, make it a better viewing experience, presumably for the people at home.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I was saying before, I'm not sure there's a huge clamour from the actual fans, the viewers, for this constant speeding up of the game that we see in both codes with the tinkering with rules. People saying we've got to cut down the amount of time the ball is not in play. But as I say, I remember Stuart Barnes talking about going to watch State of Origin in Australia. As a rugby union man, watching a game of probably the most elite rugby league you can watch in the world, and saying, he thoroughly enjoyed it. He was in awe of the skill of the players and the intensity of the game. But he said, you never get a breather as a fan because the game is literally non-stop. He said, there's never a moment to stop and digest what you've just seen because it's already moving on. You can't turn to the guy next to you and go, did you see that? Because you're missing something else.
That's what the goal kicking bit is for. Surely.
Yeah.
The thing that they need to speed up and try and sort out is not the time taken to kick a goal. It's the scrum resets, because you can get a chain reaction of scrum resets, and that does get a little dull.
Yeah, no one wants to see the scrum being reset for the fourth time. The players don't want it. well, some of them might want the breather, but yeah, the fans certainly don't want that. And it was you who told me. I can't remember which referee, but you were saying one of the referees once said about the line out that there's literally not a single line out goes by that they couldn't blow a penalty for if they actually wanted to.
There's always something going on. There's always something going on in the scrum as well.
Yeah.
It's like someone's gone in at the wrong angle and not quite straight. And the number of times you'll see a scrum where the props are on their knees, but the ball's still under the back feet of the number 8, and the referee's turning a blind eye to go, "We better get this on."
Yeah, exactly. It's just about not being too finicky, isn't it? And saying, "Come on, guys, we've got to get on with this game." So yeah. I'm going to say that's good enough.
Yeah. The best is the enemy of the good and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we've wandered a little away from the specific rule change, but I think our point stands. Sometimes if it isn't broke, don't fix it. I think people have to remember that these are already games that attract thousands of spectators to pay money to go and see them. Viewing audiences into the millions on TV, even sometimes in countries where they don't even play the game at any serious level, there's still people watching it.
Yeah.
So they're already pretty entertaining.
I think there are, from my personal opinion, is that they just need to police it better. I actually like that they were starting to police seatbelt tackles as a thing. So that's, you need to get that trained out of people as well. When the tackle starts slow and rides up, you go, yes, that wasn't intentional, but it still ended up doing it. So that's got to be a penalty.
Yeah. I think when they concentrated on the cannonball tackle in rugby league over the last couple of years, where you'd get a third player launching himself into a tackle that had become static and attacking the knee joint of the ball carrier, serious potential for major injury.
That sounds like it's setting out to injure.
That's what it looked like at times. Like there was a real malice going on, and I think the referees have largely stamped that out now. You don't see so much of it, which is good. As you say, sometimes you identify an issue and you clamp down, and it's the right thing. Other times, I think, as you said, knee jerk for this rule change, and that's what it feels like, isn't it? It feels like somebody said, "Right, blanket change, and this will be the magic bullet that solves all our problems."
And stops us getting our asses sued off.
Yeah, indeed. I don't think that will be the case. I think there's a serious case for saying we need to limit the amount of contact in training. To say, well, if people are taking lots of impacts in the week before the actual game, do they really need to be? That's a place that I would look more. And I would also say we really need to tackle the culture of celebrating the players who play through the pain. And that's a hard one because we all do it, and we all sort of salute guys who, pop their finger back in and get on with playing, pop their shoulder back in, play on with a huge gash and everything. It is admirable, but at the same time, you think it's not setting a good example for younger players who feel they have to put themselves in harm's way. I think the game should be protecting players from themselves sometimes, and people should be making the decision, no, you're not fit to play.
And again, we come back to the HIA and making sure that is rigidly enforced and scrupulously applied.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose we go from one rugby union to be with some ill-chosen, so poorly executed, but probably well-intentioned plans, to another rugby union in absolute chaos and disarray, and that's the Welsh Rugby Union, when we have a former head of women's rugby telling the BBC that a male colleague joked that he'd like to rape her in an office full of people, and that this was an exemplar of a toxic culture that, it's hard you don't want to judge things where you weren't present, but it seems to me it rings very true that things were smoothed over, dismissed as banter, not followed up, and there was no willingness to tackle what was clearly a problem.
Yeah, this was definitely one of those fish rots from the head sort of situations where the leadership needed changing, and it was very much, I think, the last straw that broke the camel's back as well, if we're going to mix our metaphors, where the clubs had not been getting on with the chief executive, and it was just something had to give to make the change in the Welsh Rugby Union and give Gatland the support he needs, by making the changes that are required to the structure of rugby in the country.
Yeah. I think there's a feeling, isn't there, in Welsh rugby that the game has been in stagnation for some time, and that the leadership have, whether it's fair or not fair, that the leadership have not been doing what's necessary to keep the game growing and changing and competing with other countries, and that they've gone from a team that were, consistent at the highest level, at the national level of the men's game, consistently there or thereabouts, as the top side in the Northern Hemisphere, but they haven't been able to maintain that because there's just not a quality of players coming through.
The only sort of silver lining I can see to this whole thing is the appointment of Nigel Walker as the interim chief executive, which puts a person of colour into a very high position in the game, which is always good to see as well.
Yeah, it shows a willingness perhaps to break up old cliques and say, right, well, maybe we do need to shake things up a bit. And Walker, I think, has done very well in his first sort of pronouncements. He's struck a good note of reason, but he's sort of he's showing a real willingness to, I think, to ask tough questions, to get things investigated, and hopefully to abide by the results of those investigations.
Yeah.
Some of the things that people have been saying were just shocking. One woman was saying that she was quizzed about whether she had the business experience to be running a major rugby club when she was on the Forbes list of most influential business women. She was one of the government's champions of women in business. You think, I find it very hard to believe that anybody actually interrogating her about her business acumen had more business experience than she did.
Yeah. They just had. No, you can't. There's no way to even joke about that.
No. But I do think, yeah, as you say, that maybe the clubs and the regions have seen an opportunity here to say, right, the powers that be have put themselves in a right pickle, and now we can force the change we want to see.
And Gatland's going to be another driver for change in the Welsh Rugby Union. He was talking change to the whole system before he was appointed back to the national team. He's going to want to make sure that he gets the best Welsh players coming through in the best way possible.
Yeah,
and that's going to require change to the structure in Wales.
Yeah, Wales is a small country. Let's make no bones about it. But you know what? A lot of rugby nations are small countries, in terms of their overall population and resource. But what is different in Wales to most rugby nations is rugby is the national sport. You can't say that in England. You can't say that in Scotland. You can't say it in Australia. Wales rugby is what, especially in South Wales, it's what most people grow up want to play sports want to do. So it should always be a powerhouse with that national support. Hopefully they'll sort it out and it will continue to be a powerhouse, except when they play England, when they get flattened. That's obviously what we all want to see.
Yeah. And then we go from one set of unacceptable behaviours in Wales to a whole different set coming out in Italy, where we see 11-cap Italy winger Benetton Treviso, Ivan Neymar, suspended until the 30th of June for racist abuse of a teammate, Sheriff Traore, to whom he sent a rotten banana as a Secret Santa present.
It just beggars belief, doesn't it? That you'd think you can get away with that in this day and age. And B, the fact that it's your own teammate. There's supposed to be a bond between teammates, isn't there? Let's face it. But just it just beggars belief. And a 6-month ban is entirely fair and reasonable. I would have supported longer, to be honest.
And it's with an intensive course of training as well, in basically how to be a person, from the sound of it.
Yeah, I think that's what's required. I think there'd be a case for saying if you're his club, that you'd be showing him the door. But that said, I've seen players make those kinds of commit those sorts of egregious behaviour before and learn from it in the past. So I can understand why the club would say, you know what, we'll give you the chance to learn and grow from this instead of just turfing you out immediately. And then it'll be up to him to see whether he can do that. But one thing I would say there, though, is if he engages with his cause and he appreciates what he's done is out of line, just plain wrong, and he grows and moves on from that, that's not a cause for celebrating him for doing something right. That's just, well done, you've got to the minimum standard.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people do something wrong and then they apologise, they almost get celebrated more than people who never did the thing wrong in the first place.
Yeah. We're into the Chris Rock routine with the I look after my kids. You're supposed to.
Yeah, that's the minimum standard of parenthood, isn't it? That's what's expected.
I ain't never been in jail. Good.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
Exactly. So, as I say, slipping shouldn't necessarily mean the end for you, but it's good to see that it's being dealt with seriously. And as I say, what on earth was he thinking?
Yeah.
Because you wonder sometimes when someone does something like that, if they do it because they think there is a wider culture that will have their back.
Mm.
They think, if he thinks he's confident that he can get away with it because he thinks he's in the majority. So
yeah, I know that football in Italy has had has a long history of issues with racism in certain areas and certain fan bases.
Yeah, that's true. We've seen it quite recently, haven't we? With teams being ordered to play behind closed doors, and so
wider education also needed.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's indefensible, but as we say, they've taken action, and it's 6 months, including 2 weeks before, just 2 weeks before the Six Nations starts, is not it's not a lily-livered punishment. It's a proper punishment.
And it's not, it's like he's going to be in or would have been in or around the national team. He would have been likely for selection to the squad at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. And it's World Cup year as well. And now he's basically said, well, you're not going to see the end of the season. You're not going to play in the Six Nations. So you may be completely out of the running for the World Cup as well.
Well, one thing, he'll lose condition. But...
Yeah. So he'll have, so, you know, he can think about that while he's watching the Six Nations from home.
Yes. Speaking of the Six Nations, in lighter news, England players are dropping like flies.
It does look that way, doesn't it? Steve Borthwick is not going to have a nice, easy ride for his first tournament as England head coach.
Elliot Daly down. Courtney Lawes injured. All sorts of some fairly high-profile names as well, and some up-and-coming players like Jack Willis, I see, was injured as well.
Yeah, and that's a player I think a lot of people would have been looking forward to see in the Six Nations.
I was interested to see that he's in England squad despite playing for Toulouse, because the former Wasps and Worcester players were given an exemption from the must-play in England rule when the clubs folded.
Yeah, which is understandable, I suppose, given that they had to scramble to find new clubs. I think that's only fair, but I wonder how long that will be. That will go on before they start to think, the powers that be start to think it's undermining the principle of the rule. Because you know, you think, yeah, you've had to scramble to find a club, but if you go and sign a 4-year contract with them,
there's the danger they could end up settling there, going, I kind of like the lifestyle here. I like the country. I like the town.
Yeah. And if you've already capped them while playing for that country in 1 year, hard to then turn around to them and say to the next one, well, you're only honouring the contract you already signed, but no, you're not allowed to play for your country anymore because you don't play in England.
Yeah.
But then again, impossible to then say to other players who've gone to other countries, you can't play for you certainly can't play for England because you don't play in England. But that guy can because reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually always liked seeing English players play abroad in almost any sport, because English sportsmen have always seemed really parochial to me in that they don't travel. You don't see them signing for clubs in other countries very often.
Yeah.
And even Scots and Welsh and people in football and in rugby, Scots and English and Welshmen seem much more likely to travel than the English do.
Yeah, I think language has something to do with it, doesn't it? Certainly in football, I think the truth is most of the foreign footballers coming to the English Premiership probably already speak at least a bit of English, whereas, you know, we can remember Gaza trying to learn Italian, for example, which is a bit cruel of me to say because Gaza actually had the nerve to go and do it, unlike some people.
And people mocked Joey Barton for his French accent in a press conference, which actually has some basis in science as a thing that helps.
Yeah, fair enough. And to be fair, you can mock Joey Barton for a lot more than just that anyway.
Yeah.
It's not like he hasn't given people ammunition over the years. But no, I do see your point. I think sometimes there is a tendency in the English game to kind of regard the English game as the pinnacle of all. So why would you need to go anywhere else? And you think it probably, it wouldn't hurt the national team either for players to go and get exposure to different countries and come back with some different ideas to share with their own teammates.
Yeah. And the problem with saying that England players can't play outside England is when you're trying to attract stars from other countries into your team, you're going to end up running out of places to put your England players. When you have Scottish internationals, Irish internationals, and Australian and New Zealand players in your side, and South Africans if you're Saracens.
That's true. It's but England are not the only people to have put this rule in place. Other countries have done it over the years.
Oh, it's worked for New Zealand. You have to give them that.
Yeah, indeed. So it it is understandable, but I think it's not necessarily required all the time. I'm not sure it was an existential threat to English rugby when players like Johnny Wilkinson started going to Toulon.
Yeah.
And as you say, you think if a few star players like that do move out of the game, yeah, you might consider that a loss to the game over here. But you could surely take the opportunity to recruit star players from other countries that your fans will be willing to pay to come and see.
I think that if I remember right, the New Zealand team have a rule where if you've been playing for the national side for a certain number of years, you're able to go and play outside New Zealand. And still
And that's
selection.
I think that made sense, didn't it? Because I think the New Zealand RFU realised that they didn't want to stand in the way of their best players getting the opportunity to get really good paydays, which they had earned by their prowess on the field.
Yeah.
And I think they thought, hang on, if a player's got to like, their peak years, they've already had like 30, 40 caps. They can command a huge salary, which they may not be able to get in the game, in the domestic game in New Zealand. It's a little churlish to try and to say to that person, choose between your country and this contract, which has limited shelf life because your career is short as a player.
And if they start making people make that choice, you end up with people retiring from international rugby in their prime.
Yeah, exactly. Or, of course, people exploring their ancestry for other opportunities to play internationally. We had an interesting interview with Jackson Hastings, who played for Salford and Wigan recently in Super League, and who was, of course, Australian born and bred, but played for Great Britain in the ill-fated Great Britain tour of 2019 down under. And he was talking about the fact that although people didn't know it, he'd always intended to play for England if the opportunity came up, and had in fact been in talks to play for England Knights before he left Australia, before he even came to the English game, because he was very close with his grandmother, who was, born and bred English. And he said the only reason he didn't play for the Knights was because the travel arrangements couldn't work out that year. But then he came to play for Salford, won the Man of Steel, moved to Wigan, had a great season there, and got picked for Great Britain. So he said, he could understand that there were a few English fans who were a bit disgruntled about someone who's clearly an Aussie getting picked for Great Britain. But he said it was never a case of me thinking, oh, Australia's a bit too hard to play for. I'll see if I can play for someone else instead. But it was always what he intended to do if he got the chance.
And when you qualify through your parents rather than the grandparent rule or anything like that, there's more of a chance, I think, that you're going to be playing through motivation rather than opportunism. It's not like they just had a pint of Guinness with Jack Charlton or something.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are definitely cases where people have thought, you know what, I'm not quite good enough to play for my country of birth, but I'm good enough to play for someone else, and I do have a connection, so let's do it. But equally, there are times when people may have a genuine connection, even to more than one nation. I think that's sometimes something that some fans find hard to understand. They look at someone like me, you think, yeah, born and raised in England, parents born and raised in England, grandparents born and raised in England, lived in England all my life. There is no, if I'd suddenly found out actually one of my grandparents was born in Scotland, or, and I actually had any athletic ability, which everyone who knows me knows is not the case, I'd suddenly decided to play for Scotland in some sport, it would have been entirely cynical, because I'm clearly English. But there are other people who do have 2 or 3 different nationalities through different sources, and who may feel all of them keenly.
I've always been somewhat suspicious of people who qualify for a country on residence rather than any sort of ancestral connection.
Yeah, a little bit odd, but I suppose it depends. To me, a lot of it depends on what age the residence is as well. I think Lennox Lewis was a guy who got a lot of stick for choosing to box for Canada as an amateur, but then Britain as a
British
pro.
license.
Yeah. But of course, he lived in this country till he was 12 years old. Then he moved to Canada and picked up the accent. And you think, yes, obviously he has a strong tie to both countries. But I think, to me, someone who was born in Britain and lived there till they were 12 definitely has the right to call themselves British as a sportsman. But we've digressed again. That's my.
We have a habit of that.
Yeah, but, that's kind of what we do, isn't it? It's all about chewing the fat. The point is, limiting the international travel of your players is not necessarily always a good thing, though I can understand why countries have made that decision to try and strengthen their national side at times.
Yeah.
Because that's a good debate that they're having in rugby league as well about English players going to play in Australia, because obviously the NRL in Australia is the elite competition. It is a higher standard than Super League. But people, understandably, over here don't want to think of Super League as just a feeder competition. But on the other hand, I'm thinking surely the more English players who are over there chancing their arm and testing themselves there, the stronger the national team will be.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily have a problem with it. And I don't think if we end up with, say, 20, 25 English of the best English players playing in Australia, I don't think it means all the fans are going to stop going to watch games over here.
No.
Speaking of which, of course, we are very nearly at the start of the new rugby league season. Middle of February, it all gets going with the Challenge Cup, the oldest competition in rugby league. Starts
Jonathan Davis' favourite time of the year.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Davies must be the person who regrets the Six Nations moving from fortnightly to weekly more than anyone. There was that sweet time at the beginning of Super League, sort of late 90s, when every week on BBC, one week it'd be Five Nations, as it was then the next week it'd be round 4 of the Challenge Cup, the week after it'd be back to the Five Nations, the week after it'd be the 5th round of the Challenge Cup, and Jonathan Davies would be pulling every single weekend getting a paycheck. He'd be the only person covering both lots of games. I think that was a pretty sweet deal for him. But yeah, the Challenge Cup will get the season underway. BBC will be covering from round 1, and they'll be in Scotland for round 1, covering Edinburgh Eagles in the home tie, which will be the first time they've ever been in Scotland for a Challenge Cup tie live on the BBC. That's on February the 11th.
Did this require them to qualify?
We've had Scottish teams entering the Challenge Cup for quite a while. Not every year, but often. I'm not sure quite whether there was a qualification process or whether it was just a matter of entering. We've also got an Irish representative again this season, which is the first time for a while, but has happened before. But Dublin are taking part and seeking to be the first to get the first win by an Irish team in the Challenge Cup. It's never quite happened before. They've had a couple of close calls. I'm probably going to go and see Dublin because they are away to Hammersmith Hills Hoists, my local amateur club. So I'm thinking I will get down to watch that one and see how it goes. And of course, at about the same time, the elite end of the game gets started with the World Club Challenge at St Helens and Penrith. St Helens have flown out to Australia ready for that one. That's going to be live on Channel 4, so it'll be on free to air. It will also be live on Sky.
And
so,
are they going to be shipped back in little boxes? Are they going to get things handed to them, or
it's going to
do they actually stand a chance?
Very interesting to see how that goes. I think St Helens are coming off 4 straight Super League championships, and they haven't had the opportunity to do the World Club Challenge for a while because it hasn't taken place since the pandemic hit. But Penrith are back-to-back Australian champions, and I think if you talk to Australian fans, they'll tell you that even by Australian champion standards, Penrith are a bit special, and they'll have home advantage because it's in Australia. But the question is, how seriously will they take it? How close to their best side will the side be that takes the field against St Helens? We don't know.
How much is it going to be an Australian delight in beating the Poms?
Yeah, I think it'll be a very interesting game. I think St Helens have got a lot of ability in that team, and they're obviously going to hit it as hard as they possibly can. But beating that Penrith side in Penrith is a mighty ask, unless they play more of a second string side than you might expect. I mean, I think some comments by the Penrith coach were maybe taken a little out of context, or maybe too much credence was given to them. He said when the fixture was announced, it'll be a great experience for our youngsters. And I think certainly over this end of the globe, a lot of people immediately took that to mean he's going to play a team full of kids just to give them the experience, and that will devalue the competition. But I'm thinking it can still be a good experience for their youngsters without necessarily being in the playing squad. So maybe too much was read into that statement at the time.
Yeah, maybe it's that his young players will learn from seeing English players in action.
Yeah, and just being at an event like that, which is going to be broadcast internationally. St Helens will be playing a friendly beforehand against another Australian club, so it'd be a great experience for St Helens. It's it's a little bit like when clubs used to go on tour in the old days, which never happens anymore.
Given how much the rugby league governing bodies want international prestige and high prestige fixtures, if one side starts taking this lightly, they're gonna throw the toys out the pram, surely.
As you say, it's rugby league is, because the international game is so underdeveloped. These events are few and far between, and you want them to be celebrated properly when they do come along. It also doesn't help that at the moment there's a huge row going on between the players and the governing body in Australia, which is stopping the international calendar from being finalised because no one knows what's going to happen. It's entirely possible that the season's not going to kick off on time because players will down tools and refuse to play. So against that backdrop, this game becomes even more important. England still don't know who they're going to play at the end of the season, if they're going to play at the end of the season. Though Tonga have put their hands up and said that they'd love to come over and play a test series against England. And speaking as a rugby league fan, I'd be well up for that. I'd be happy to watch that series.
Sounds a good measure. I was wondering how much sort of cachet the likes of Wigan and St Helens actually have in Australia. Are they sort of looked on patronisingly in a sort of, oh, isn't it nice, the Poms are trying sort of way, or do they actually have prestige?
Bit of both, I think. I think certainly Wigan and St Helens have long histories of going to Australia and playing there. St Helens went 1979. The very first World Club Challenge was St Helens against Eastern Suburbs, as they were then, which is Sydney Roosters now. And of course, then we had Wigan going over in the 90s when they played Brisbane in Brisbane and beat them in a big upset. I think you only have to look really at the number of players that get signed from those clubs by Australian clubs to know that those clubs are very much still on the radar of rugby league people in Australia. You don't see it so much going from from Warrington or Hull, for example. It's like, and it's not because those clubs don't have players who could make it in the NRL. I think it's just being a Wigan player does give you a certain cachet and means you're on the radar of talent scouts in Australia, and I think the same is true for St Helens. So, yeah, I think. But on the other hand, there's no doubt the World Club Challenge means more to the British teams than to the Australian teams. Yeah, it's a bigger deal. I think it's one of those things where everybody wants to win it because they're all professional athletes and they all want to win every game they play. But for the Aussies, if they don't lose it, it's no big deal. They'll be on to the serious business of the NRL season straight after, and they won't really give it a thought. Whereas for the English team, if you win that, it's something that you'll look back on the rest of your life and say, remember when we beat the Aussies. Certainly for me as a fan, I saw Wigan when they beat Cronulla in 2017, which was the last time an English team won the World Club Challenge, and that's right up there for me with my best days as a rugby league fan. It's because it may well be something I never get the chance to see again as well. You just don't know, because it is such a tough ask. So yeah, all good stuff though.
Well, I'm glad we managed to get some rugby league into this, given the how much of the news cycle has been dominated by rugby union shenanigans.
And to be fair, it would be at this time of year. Of course, we are in the off season for rugby league, but as I say, not for much longer. The season will be back soon. In fact, for me as a rugby fan, this is a great time of year because I'll get the beginning of the rugby league season and the Six Nations, which I still think is the best international rugby competition there is.
I would have to agree with you there.
Yeah. All due respect to the Southern Hemisphere and the Rugby Championship and even to World Cups. But the Six Nations has a special something. It's just the deep-seated nature of the rivalries, I think, and the long history of it means it's just the way all the fans of all the countries buy into it.
Yeah. So more to come on that next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should actually come out with things like predictions for next time.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be hard to predict because there's so much change in things with Gatland back, with a new coaching team at England. Things are shaken up a little bit. So it's not going to be an easy call, but really you have to say Ireland look in a very, very strong position.
Yeah. We'll have to go through where we come out with our rankings for next time.
Yeah, we'll do that separately, I think, and reveal our final table to each other on the show and see how we go. And anybody watching, if you want to give us your predictions for the final table in the Six Nations or just for individual matches, please do let us know here or on Facebook.
Comment below, Facebook, And speaking of commenting below, we were going to have a little experiment rather than going to the vault for trying a tackle of our choice. We thought we'd put the question out to the viewer to see if he wants to or she wants to make a suggestion for their favourite tackle or their favourite try.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know, and we'll stick it on the next show. And have a look. There are so many great tries and tackles to choose from. I know you've all got your own favourites. So again, comment below or put it on Facebook, the Rugby Codebreakers, whichever, and we'll pick it up and we'll have a look because we love a good try and we love a good tackle, possibly even more. But
as they say in YouTube land, like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah, and share.
Yeah.
Definitely. Don't hog this to yourselves. Get this
Make
good stuff out to the
masses.
So with that said, I think we've covered most of what we wanted to cover. There's so much that we could go on and on and on with it all, but it's oh no, there is one thing I did want to draw attention to, which was, of course, we talked in the last show about the habit of rugby league players getting picked up to be defensive coaches in rugby union, and no sooner had we said that than about a week later, the former Wigan and Bradford second row forward Mike Forshaw was announced as the defence coach for Wales, heading into this Six Nations. So that just keeps happening.
We could almost call this tradition at this point.
Indeed. I suppose Warren Gatland's thinking, I won't have Sean Edwards by my side for this time, this go round with Wales. So I'll pick up another hard-nosed rugby league man. But it's interesting because Mike Forshaw has very little coaching experience. He was a terrific player, played at the top level for Great Britain, had quite a good record against the Aussies, unlike most players, picked up a couple of wins over them. And he has a lot of background as a strength and conditioning coach at clubs like Wigan and Warrington, but not so much of the sort of team coaching. So it's an interesting choice, I thought. Yeah. But he does have bags of experience. So I'm sure Gatland knows what he's doing.
I think we can say that fairly safely.
Yeah. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we how many more of these defence coaches come up, and who's going to be the first rugby league person to get picked up as an attacking coach. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I suppose you can claim Farrell does the whole schmear.
Well, there is the head coaching, of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that someone like Kevin Sinfield gets picked up as a defensive coach when you think, but he was such a good creative player. I'm sure he's got a few things to say to people about putting in attacking kicks and missed passes and things like that. But that's probably what makes him a good defensive coach, as we said on the last show. He spent his career unpicking defences. He knows a bit about what defences need to do in order to be good. So with all that said, I think it's time to put this one to bed. And thank you all very much for watching.
Yeah. We look forward to this time.
We will be back sooner. We do apologise for our long winter break, but
it's
that time of year. Yeah. This was January. We'll have at least 2 episodes in February to make up for it. So we'll be back within a fortnight, I think, ready for the kickoff of everything. Six Nations, Super League, Challenge Cup, the whole lot.
Gonna be a blast.
Yeah.
Take care.
Cheers.